Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Many of you, I'm sure, locked in, and hopefully we will all get through this. My name is Eric Neighberg, and I'll be your host today for this Scrum Pulse, Fixing Your Scrum, Practical Solutions to Common Scrum Problems. I run marketing operations here for Scrum.org, and I'm joined by two of our professional Scrum trainers and the authors of the Fixing Your Scrum book, Todd Miller and Ryan Ripley. Thanks for joining us, guys. If we can go to the next slide, Todd. So just some quick guidelines. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for these two. Just ask them in the question panel, and we'll get to as many as we can, and any that we don't get to, we'll try to get to offline after the webinar. But ask your questions as they go through their content, and we'll take them as we can. You will be muted. Next slide. So just briefly, a little bit about who is Scrum.org. Scrum.org is founded by, and our chairman is Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. Ken continues to work to evolve Scrum as we focus on helping people improve how they deal with complex problems. We teach training courses, do certifications, as well as provide a lot of free content like this webinar to help you continue to learn and continue to evolve your learning. So I'll take that to the next slide. And with that, let Todd and Ryan introduce themselves.
Thank you, Eric.
Go for it, Todd.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name's Todd Miller. As Eric mentioned, Ryan and I co-authored the book Fixing Your Scrum. And I've been a professional Scrum trainer for Scrum.org for about 4 years now. I'm also work as the VP of the Agile Innovation Practice for a company called Itiro Group.
Cool. And I'm Ryan Ripley. I've also, as Todd mentioned, a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I think I've been around for about 2 years teaching classes now. Host the Agile for Humans podcast. Wrote the book with Todd, and just really looking forward to everyone's questions. So thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you get a lot out of this.
Cool. Ready for this first slide?
I think so.
So why write another Scrum book? Ryan, you want to kick this off?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot. So we thought we would talk about this real quick because there is no shortage of Scrum books out there. I think on the shelves behind me, there's at least one shelf is full of Scrum books, and I love them all, and they're all great. But then we had to figure out, why are we doing this? Because there are so many good books already. And so we really had to sit down and think, like, what could we bring that's different? What could we do that would be a little bit unique? And so we decided, well, what are all the problems people are having? Like, we haven't seen that really written about too much. Like, you know, all the anti-patterns, all of the headaches, all of the struggles. And then we had to decide, well, from whose perspective? And so we thought, you know what, from a Scrum Master perspective, what do we see when we walk into companies? And so we started cataloging all of the things that we see when we go in, all the things that we get asked in our classes, all the things that people seem to really struggle with, or some of the anti-patterns that are at play at a lot of our client organizations. And then we thought, this is interesting, but have we gone far enough? And so Todd and I put ourselves in the shoes of a Scrum Master. We said, all right, if we're walking into a company and we see all these anti-patterns, I think there's like 50 or 60 anti-patterns that we've collected in the book. If we see this anti-pattern, you know, first of all, what's some of the theory behind what's happening, you know, with this anti-pattern? What are some of the symptoms? But also, what have we tried, and what do we do when we see this out in the wild? So when we see this anti-pattern, what are the questions? How do we facilitate through it? What's a good retro format to expose this, to expose the issue? What's a liberating structure to help everyone have a good conversation? Like, every trick, everything that we do, we went ahead and put it in the book, right? And so we decided, that's interesting, that's different. And so that's why we hope that Fixing Your Scrum is a complementary offering to the book space, that not only, you know, do you have these other great books that give you the introduction to Scrum, that teach you some of the basics of Scrum, but now there's this guide that, as you get stuck with Scrum, as we need some solutions, this book will hopefully help you out. I mean, what do you think, Todd?
Yeah, and you know, I think back to when we first started having conversations about this, and we were comparing and talking about a lot of the common issues that we're working with our clients and customers on. And as we're sharing war stories, as Ryan and I were sharing war stories, and we just happened to notice that so much of the conversations that we were having were in common, right? It wasn't like I was presenting something Ryan had never been or dealt with before, or vice versa with me. We just found all these common things that um, that we thought we would put in here. And I think what was hard about it is that there is no panacea to this stuff. It really is based off of the context of the situation that you're in, right? We're in the complex domain of work. So we tried to present in the book some ideas on how you could facilitate the beginning of resolving that issue, rather than saying, oh, we have a product owner that isn't empowered, right? This is exactly how you solve it. I don't think it's possible to tell you exactly how to solve it, but what we can do is help you bring transparency to it, talk about the why, and that's what we really want for.
Yeah, I think at its core, it's a book about empiricism, right? So we're going to bring transparency to issues. We're giving you ideas about how to inspect that issue further in your context, and then we have some thoughts about adaptations. But as Todd said, it's not well, if this is the problem you see, here's the one right and true answer. Instead, we're helping people make sense of complex situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So the writing process, this is something that a lot of people have asked us quite a bit about, is what's it like to write a book? And so here's a little bit of of how it went. You could see this iterative process here in the middle. So there was some pre-writing stuff. We work with Pragmatic Publishing, and one of the things we do there is just kind of outline chapters and write story maps.
Well,
And
Todd,
then
we should
from there,
back a little bit. We should like go way, because this
okay,
process, it's so difficult, right? And so I actually started this book solo. In 2017, got hooked up with Prog, started working on the book, and almost failed completely. Like, this process is just daunting, and you're starting on page 1 and you're trying to write somewhere around 250 pages. It just got overwhelming. Plus, training was taking off, and really got stuck, and really had to leverage some of the Scrum values, show a little openness and courage, and say, hey, I need some help. And so I reached out to Todd, and I'm like, hey man, this thing's not going great. I'm stuck. I could really use your help with this. And Todd, being Todd, he just said yes, which was awesome. And what was cool was, and this shouldn't be surprising, because when we go into companies and when we're working with development teams, pair programming, mob programming, I mean, we love, that's our jam. Like, we think more, many heads are better than one. And so when we teamed up on the book, suddenly the energy came back. The conversations were rich. We were suddenly like, we were able to figure out directionally what to do. And so that really was a changing point. That was really like, we were able to pivot into a really good space. And so want to make sure to call that out. Like, this book almost didn't exist. But when we teamed up, things definitely got better. This pre-writing that I'll let Todd get back into, the outlining was essential, because, and the one thing that really stood out to me was, we did not have the focus on who the book was for at the beginning. And once we realized this really, and now look, if you're a product owner, a dev team member, an executive, if you pick up this book, you're definitely going to get a lot out of it. But we have really zeroed in on, how do we help Scrum Masters diagnose and understand and hopefully turn situations that they're in. And so,
yeah, and I think that role, it's interesting that you're mentioning that, Ryan, because we didn't land on it being geared towards Scrum Masters really almost right before our first technical review. So a technical review, our first happened after the first 8 chapters were done. And so somewhere around that point, half of the book is just about written, and we went back through and revised it. And we said, this book is for Scrum Masters. Like, that's everything that we're writing is for Scrum Masters. And as Ryan said, it's not that there won't be value if you're not a Scrum Master to read it. We actually encourage that, but we really wanted to micro focus it on that. Do you want to talk a little bit about why we did that, Ryan?
Well, one of our Scrum values is focus.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we kept going down this, and in my opinion of it was, we kept going down this path where we were getting too broad with the topics. And this could have easily spun into another introduction to Scrum book. And we wanted to make sure that we focused on the Scrum Master. But the epiphany, and I don't remember if Todd said it or I've said it, we spent so much time working on airplanes and in hotels, and like, I don't remember which conversation it was. I think it was actually Todd, so I'll give him credit for this. At one point he said, you know what, man, it's really like when the Scrum Master does not fulfill their role, most of these impediments show up. Like an apathetic Scrum Master just wreaks havoc on an organization. And we both sat there quietly for a minute. We're like, wow, that's important. We believe it to be true. And so we really need to focus on helping Scrum Masters, really understand the situations they're in, or else these impediments just start, flying all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember who said it either. It was probably a hotel bar conversation, but I think that really resonated with us, and that's been a key discovery and us helping Scrum Masters, right? Because if you feel like you can't change anything in your organization or remove any of these anti-patterns, find a different way. Find a different way to change it, because you can. That's your job, right? You serve the organization, you serve your product owner, and you serve the development team. So that was I think that was an epiphany for how we would micro focus the book, and I think we've carried that through to a lot of our work recently.
Yep. To kind of tie off the writing process here, we started this 2 years ago, and so it was basically from idea to published was a 2-year process. There's a lot of evaluation, a lot of editing, a lot of drafting. We wrote the first draft and then probably did 4 or 5 more drafts of each chapter before it was ever accepted. We had an amazing editor. So if you ever go down this track, invest or expect or ask for an amazing editor. So Dawn Shannonfelt, she's awesome. Like I'm so happy her name's on the cover. She made us sound far more intelligent than either one of us deserve. I think good writing is good editing. And but yeah, 2-year process, a lot of peaks and valleys. But overall, like just great experience that really helped us both refine the way that we think about and teach Scrum.
Yeah, huge shout out to Don on that too. And so, this circle shows one thing before we move on to the next slide, because I think Ryan and I are really excited to take your questions, is that if you're ever thinking about going through this process, don't approach it with waterfall, right? Ryan and I really iteratively went through this, and we even created focus by concentrating on 1 chapter or 2 chapters at the most at a time. We sort of set ourselves a WIP limit for what we would work on. And even in the pre-writing, like that is not for perfection. That's just to get a couple ideas so that we can start going, and we could get chapters into the hands of the editor, and we could have a lot of dialogue around what we were focusing on. So that would be my advice. Don't start the writing process using waterfall, trying to accomplish everything. As we mentioned, we were halfway through the book till we figured out who the core audience for the book was. So
rapid, it's small batches, rapid feedback. We were able to get on track. So maybe using Scrum for books is actually a good thing, right?
Yeah. Done increments.
What's that?
Potentially shippable chapters.
I like it.
Okay, one more slide. Where do we find the time to do all of this? So a huge shout out to Southwest and Marriott, because that's where a vast majority of this book was written. Ryan and I travel quite a bit for work. I didn't want to these are free stock photos. I didn't want to violate any rules. So, but Ryan and I would do a lot of co-training and sit in a lot of hotel lobbies, writing a lot of things, and then carry that over into our plane rides. Yeah, so that's where we found the time. Anything else to add on that, Ryan?
No, I think we've teed it up. We've talked about the book a bit, shared a few of our thoughts. I think we're good.
Yeah, so questions.
Yeah, so this is for all of you. And so questions about Scrum, questions about, if you want to ask about the book, the writing process, it's your time, and we'd love to see what you all come up with.
So thanks, guys, and I think that was a great introduction. We've got questions coming in. I'm going to jump around a little bit on some of the questions, because I see one here that's kind of I think a good kicking off point. And there's some questions about Scrum, and there's some questions about books. But I think this is a perfect one to get started, which is, why did you decide on the book name, Fixing Your Scrum?
Okay, so there's a story here. We originally wanted to call the book Breaking Bad Scrum, right? So we really wanted to have an action-oriented, almost like a call to action type of title, right? So Breaking Bad Scrum would have been, like, because we are just so, like, it just drains us to see Scrum not being used to its maximum potential, and to be opportunistic in the market, and to be a competitive advantage for companies. And so we wanted something actionable. We came up with Breaking Bad Scrum. The lawyers got involved very quickly, warned us that we could get sued into oblivion, so we had to find something different. And we thought, you know what, Breaking Bad Scrum, it could be kind of negative, like we're breaking things. And so what if we pivot to fixing your Scrum? And what we mean here is we want to help you fix what's going on in your organization. We actually want this to be a practical, applicable, useful book. And so fixing your Scrum is what we came up with as far as, you know, how to convey that desire to not just, you know, transfer information, but to actually give you tools to go out and fix the things that you know could be a little better or could be changed within your organization.
And I have to admit, behind the scenes, to give a little bit of inside baseball here, it was a sad week or two for Ryan and I, because we really loved the Breaking Bad Scrum title. So it was a sad week or two. Ryan and I had a lot of dialogue. We're just like, but we also didn't want to get sued.
Yeah, and so Andy Hunt, one of the Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas are the founders, actually two Agile Manifesto signatories and founders of Prog. I think Andy stepped in and gave the suggestion. He's like, guys, we can't do the Breaking Bad Scrum, but fixing your Scrum, that could be powerful and help people, and we agreed, and so we went with it.
Cool. Thanks, guys. There's one or two other book questions. I'm going to hit those real quick, and then let's get on to, there's a lot of questions about Scrum. So one was, is the book going to be translated into German or other languages?
Great question. So any inquiries can go to Prog. We are totally open to translation, and we hope that happens sooner than later.
Yeah. Is the book physical, or is it digital, or is it both?
Both. Yeah, it's available on Amazon right now, and there is a Kindle version of it, and you can also purchase the digital copy of it on Prog on their website. But we do have a hardback copy that's available on Amazon right now.
Yep, Kindle and paper.
Excellent. And the last one I see on books, and then we'll get to Scrum. Was your editor, and this is actually interesting because I think this ties back to Scrum Master questions as well. Was your editor knowledgeable about Scrum and Agile before reading your book?
Well, she is now.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah, take it, Todd.
Yeah, so not at all. When she started, she had heard of Scrum but didn't know anything about it, and she read the Scrum guide probably like 20 times and told us about it. It gave her feedback on that as well. But she said that I'll just say that her not knowing was actually really positive for us, because she would ask obvious questions. Like, you know, we've been around, Ryan and I have been around Scrum so long that sometimes the things that are intuitive to us aren't quite intuitive to other people. I think that's a challenge that we have to always be cognizant of as we teach and we do consulting. But she just would pinpoint really micro things that we needed to explain. So her not knowing about Scrum was actually awesome. I think it helped make the book a lot better. I bet you that she would be an awesome Scrum Master at this point, given how many questions she asked us about Scrum, but she had no prior Scrum experience.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Todd was saying, she asked questions that made the book so much better. And towards the end, I mean, if we're totally transparent, you know, she was rewriting certain sentences and even smaller paragraphs and helping us through edits. And she would say, guys, does this look all right? Did I stick to, and we never once had to say no. And so by the end of the 2-year period, I mean, there were a few times where she actually called us out for, no, I think you guys meant sprint backlog instead of product backlog. And she was right. And so she definitely she leveled up. But that's why I think an amazing editor is so important. She took the time to learn. Like, she was looking at videos, she read the Scrum guide, she was asking a lot of great questions, and Dawn's just amazing.
Yeah, you know, one thing I think we should add here is that we had an awesome group of technical reviewers. So the way technical review works, I had briefly mentioned it, is once we were halfway finished with the book, about 8 chapters, we sent it off to a bunch of technical reviewers, from any person that we could consider to be a Scrum expert to go through and just make sure that it was clear and concise in regards to that. Obviously, Ryan and I have our own set of opinions, so there were some things that we could debate on and determine what path we'd want to go forward with, but they would go through and factually check it. So a huge shout out to all of our technical reviewers that we had. And then that happened again at the end of the book where they got to go through the last 8 chapters and provide their feedback.
Yeah, it's
Hey,
one of the,
guys, I'm gonna, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna say it's one of the blessings of being a PST is that we have access to some of the top Scrum professionals in the world, and definitely helped us out quite a bit.
Cool. So I think people are looking to get on to their Scrum questions.
All right, let's do it.
Based on some of the things I'm seeing coming in. So let's talk about Scrum. So here's one. This is timely and obviously asked because of the time that we're in. With the actual context for ones that are still working, how can we optimize team collaboration when we're used to being next to each other and near each other? Now everybody's at home.
So I think there's a few steps here. And Todd and I have talked about this a little bit. And we get this question a lot. And so I think getting everyone on a Zoom call or on a GoToMeeting or a GoToWebinar, whichever platform or tool that you're on, and really having an honest conversation about how everything has just changed. So the team, you're back to forming, in my opinion. So we need to figure out the new team norms. We need new working agreements. We need to figure out, how we're going to interact and behave and utilize these tools to get us back to as close to face as possible. And so I think a lot of that is starting with working agreements. Like when we're together, the cameras are on. When we send Slack messages, we're not expecting immediate responses. When we send an email, it needs to be, certain types of discussions in email, certain types of discussions in Slack. If something's truly an emergency, text or call. Like really getting down to the finer points of these working agreements, I think is really important. Something that I've also helped some newly remote teams. Like we've just one of my most favorite liberating structures is the TRIZ. And so check out liberatingstructures.com, read up about the TRIZ. But basically, I've posed the question of how do we make sure that remote work makes our teams fail? And then have those people come up with all the reasons. Oh, we failed to turn on our cameras. We failed to respond to each other in an appropriate way. We don't have the tooling to do pair program. Like they come up with all the things that are going to be impediments or that they perceive to be problems. And that gives a Scrum Master a list of things to either diffuse, whether it's a myth, or to actually go out and solve, or to work with a team to solve. And so those are some of the few things that I've tried. Todd, what do you think?
I think now more than ever is the time to bring the Scrum values into the forefront of what we're doing. I think that if you can place emphasis on that, there's a lot of really great collaborative tools out there. But from a Scrum Master perspective, thinking about how we can better exhibit openness, what can we do to be more courageous? How are we committing to this new virtual world, and is commitment there is to be a good team member, to over communicate? How are we creating focus? It's really difficult, right? Especially if you have little ones at home. But is there additional ways as a team though that we can focus on things, maybe tools that support that? And then lastly, focusing on respect, right? And making sure that everybody's voice is heard. So I would say now is a very opportunistic time to fall back onto the Scrum values and look where you might be able to take advantage of where your team might be struggling a bit. And along with that, looking at how empiricism is affected by this, right? The 3 pillars of empiricism: inspection, adaptation, and transparency. Where are there opportunities to improve in those areas, and are there tools that are lending themselves to creating transparency around what we're doing, and are we appropriately inspecting and adapting? So I would say more so than tools, fall back onto the Scrum values and empirical process control, and really use those as areas of where you might be able to focus and getting tooling and finding ways to communicate that support them.
And just one quick add-on. I think as Scrum Masters, we also need to make sure we're spending even more time with the leadership teams and with the outside organization. The way that we manage, and so I'm the the steward for the professional agile leadership class, so leadership and management is really important to me. I think the way that people manage has to change. I don't think the traditional walk around and see if everybody's busy or trying to translate that to an online space is going to be effective. So I think Scrum Masters, we're going to have to spend a lot of time with leadership, helping them understand that the better product visions at an organizational level that we have, the greater understanding of the goals that we have, leading through intention. I think those kind of things are going to become even more important as these distributed teams try to figure out how to best deliver value during these challenging times. So I think even more time with leadership is going to be essential as well.
Great, thanks guys. So next question, Kelly asks, do you have any advice on how to handle skeptics of Scrum on your team in dealing with those who maybe aren't believers?
What do you think, Todd?
So there's actually something that I've used for this quite a bit, and it's worked well. And I believe it's a Mike Cohn thing that was in one of his books. But for years, when there's skeptics of Scrum, I allow them to openly be skeptical, right? Don't try to squash it and shut it down. Have them ask hard questions. Let them be skeptics. I think that in Mike Cohn's book, he called it anointing a champion cynic. And let them challenge and let them understand the why. Most of the time, when you're dealing with somebody that's skeptic, there's a good chance that they've experienced a Scrum anti-pattern at another job that was not helpful to them, right? Maybe they were maybe velocity was used as a weapon against them. Maybe daily scrums were nothing but a status meeting for a manager. So I think that allow them to practice openness with their skeptical viewpoints and prepare yourself to be able to answer the why behind it. That's where I would start with that.
And then just to add to that, because I think that's a really smart answer to have that skeptic champion, but then also come up with experiments with the Scrum team that you can use to work towards building that trust with the skeptic. If that person says, well, this doesn't work because of X, well, what's an experiment we could run that shows that just having a definition of done might make delivery and the smoother or the status of the increment more transparent? How could we prove that? How could we partner with this person to collaboratively come up with experiments that kind of bring them along incrementally?
Yeah, and I think that we've seen just about every kind of skeptic from we can't start building this until we figure out the entirety of the architecture to this doesn't work for this problem that we're trying to solve, this complex problem that we're trying to solve. We need to plan better. A lot of it tends to be around that type of thing. So I think that looking at it and arming yourself with things to describe complexity is really a powerful tool in this. In our courses, we either teach the Kinnivan framework or the Stacy graph to highlight and illustrate what a complex domain means, that more is unknown than known. That might be a helpful tool for you. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Those might be some interesting tools to uncover understanding complexity.
Great, thanks guys. So next question, I'll take part of this one here, was this is definitely breaking Bad Scrum. Would twice weekly scrums be enough? And how do you recommend encouraging the Scrum team to that it's not?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so I'm assuming this is referring to the daily Scrum, like doing that twice a week. And we get this question in class quite a bit. The question comes in a lot of forms. Do we have to do the daily Scrum every day? And it's like, well, it's called the daily Scrum, right? But that's not a satisfying answer. And so we have to dig a little deeper and figure out, why are we actually getting together as a development team every day? Like, what's the value there? And I think that's at the core of this issue. When teams decide, when dev teams decide, yeah, we just want to meet twice a week, my initial, my brain immediately goes to, well, this is a daily Scrum that has turned into a status meeting, or this is a daily Scrum that's not bringing the development team value. And that makes me kind of sad, because this is an event that the dev team uses to figure out how they're going to work best together for the next 24 hours to make progress towards their sprint goal. So this is actually their opportunity to figure out, hey, how are we going to collaborate? How are we going to pair up today? Are we making good progress on our work? Is anyone stuck? Does anyone need help? Is there anything blocking us? And it even gets I think even more granular at times where, two developers might say, hey, I could really use, or like Todd, I could really use some help this morning. You're better at testing this part of the framework than I am, but I'd really love to pair up and move this work along. So can we do that in the morning? And then maybe in the afternoon, we'll grab the product owner, make sure we're on the right track real quick, and then move on. And that's the type of event, that's the kind of discussions that we should be hearing in a daily Scrum instead of, what did you do today? What did you do today? What did you, and all that status stuff. And so I think initially, there's a few pieces here. First of all, why don't they want to attend this more frequently? Because the event is for them. Like it should be this is like when I was a developer and I was in a well-run daily Scrum, I was excited to go sync up with my teammates. I was excited to see how I could help that day. I was excited to see what kind of progress we were making and to make sure that we were always on track. And if we weren't on track, how can we swarm an issue and support one another? Like that was a really awesome opportunity. I'd imagine your devs don't feel that way right now, so we can help them shift back to, I think, a healthier daily Scrum format. But it starts with asking them, well, why don't you want to do this daily? What value are you not getting out of it? Like, what could we do to make this more valuable? I think making the event about the people involved can go a long way.
Yeah, and oftentimes I'll hear this and I'll hear, but we talk all day. Why do we need to meet every day? And as Ryan mentioned, this is a 15-minute meeting with the collective development team for the development team. And it's a planning meeting. It's a planning for what the next 24 hours would look like. So I think that we absolutely should encourage collaborations and discussions throughout the day, but this is a concentrated time just for 15 minutes to plan what the next 24 hours for the development team is going to look like. And as Ryan mentioned, it's their meeting. And last, before we move on, do you have sprint goals? Right? Is there a micro focus on your sprint? Is there a goal, or are you just chewing through product backlog items and maximizing resource utilization? That's a lot of what we put into our book, talking about how that's really an anti-pattern in and of itself, maximizing resource utilization and just trying to do as many product backlog items as you can. So create focus by adopting the practice of a sprint goal. It's in the Scrum Guide 27 times, so it's pretty important.
I would say mandatory.
Cheers, +1.
Excellent. So the next question, and I know this one comes up quite often as well, is Scrum broken if you have more than 9 development team members?
Nope.
Yeah, and I think that this one we can get through rather quickly. So in the Scrum Guide, it does say 3 to 9 recommended. It says recommended, not required. So
like as you add more people, you add more complexity. And I think that's always been the discussion, right? And I think there's some different thoughts, there's different camps on this, but if you have 12 people on your dev team and everyone's collaborating well and we're getting done increments that are pleasing customers by the end of every sprint, you're winning. And so I think another sub theme of our book is that do not take a legalistic view of Scrum.
Yeah.
Right? Do smart things within the framework, and when there's pieces of guidance that may or may not fit, well, then make intelligent decisions about that.
Yeah, and I will say from practical experience as a Scrum Master, a product owner, or an Agile coach, I do really notice a difference when there's more than 7 people. Not to say that I'm like I'm not playing Scrum Cop saying you have 15 people in your development team. That's not Scrum, because it's still Scrum. But I personally can notice a difference in communication habits in a development team once it exceeds that. Not to say, to Ryan's point, if you're developing done shippable product increments at the end of every sprint and everything is gelling, there's no reason to change it just for the sake of change it and introduce dependencies by splitting a team and having to scale unnecessarily.
Right. But if you're not getting that outcome, maybe team size is something to think about.
Yep, that's one adaptation point that you can look at.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So this, we're getting lots of the typical questions, which is perfect. I would like for you to talk about the differences between a Scrum Master and a project manager.
So a project manager. So I started, so my career was developer to project manager to people manager with some Scrum Master roles, executive, then back to Scrum Master. So I spent a lot of time as a project manager, and I'm assuming you mean like the PMBOK traditional project manager. And so that person has a lot of responsibilities, and let's talk through some of those real quick, right? So they're often assigning work, they're working on scope, they're doing budgets, they're doing updates to executives, they're leading, they're out in front. Timelines, schedules, I mean, all those things are part of project management. And so what's really cool about the 3 Scrum roles is that project management is still essential. We've taken those activities and we've broken them into the different roles. So when people say, project management skills aren't needed on a Scrum team, I'm like, that's insane. If you think about, who decides who does the work, well, it's the dev team. So we've pulled that responsibility into the dev team. Who decides scope through a product backlog and budgets, and well, that's a product owner. So who's looking at process and how the team interactions and impediments and risk mitigation to an extent? That would be a Scrum Master. And so we've taken these skills, we've taken these activities, we've moved them into the different Scrum roles. And so I think the difference that you'll see is that the project management accountabilities, responsibilities, however you want to put it, they've been decentralized into 3 different roles. So all the skill sets are still required, just different people are performing. Does that make sense? I don't know, Todd, can you say it better?
No, yeah. So I think you nailed it. And I'll just kind of summarize that really in a project management world, your scope, schedule, and budget are everything that you drive towards, and you might create a process around that. With a Scrum Master, and as Ryan alluded to, a lot of these responsibilities of an atypical project manager are split across the roles. But as a Scrum Master, you're practicing servant leadership, which means you're putting the success of others above yourself. You're upholding Scrum, so you are an enabler of Scrum. And as Ryan was mentioning too, that you're removing impediments that the development team or product owner can't remove themselves. And oftentimes that means working out into the ecosystem of your organization to solve really difficult problems that Scrum might make readily transparent. So is that a good summary, Ryan?
I like it a lot. And I think what you just jogged loose one more thought from me is that that time, scope, budget, that's the iron triangle for a project manager. In Scrum, we're value driven. And so in Scrum, we have locked time through the length of a sprint. We've locked costs through the run rate of a Scrum team. And so it's scope that's variable, and that's the product owners, but it's the value that we can flow through our processes and practices that are far more important than those aspects of the triangle independently.
Great, thanks guys. And I'll actually in the chat, or in the I guess it's in the chat, I'll send a note out to folks. I actually wrote an article on this, somewhat related, somewhat different. Should a project manager become a Scrum Master? Because I get this question all of the time, and it's the typical consulting answer, which is it depends. I've met some really, really good project managers who would be very, very poor Scrum Masters, and vice versa, right? Project management is very much about managing time and managing workloads and a lot of things, managing deliverables, not always about managing relationships and enabling and empowering people. So there are some really good Scrum Masters who would be good project managers and vice versa, and often not so much. It's about being a people person and those sorts of things too. So I'll throw that in the chat for folks who are interested.
Awesome, thank you, Eric.
Next question, any advice on hiring Scrum Masters? What do you look for?
Oh, I love this question. Whoever put this in the chat, you made my day. Hiring, I actually, so I'll get hired, companies will ask me to come in and build up Scrum teams for them. And that I love spending other people's money. So it's a true joy. I stopped looking at resumes with one exception. So if you have the PSM3, you're probably going to jump to the top of the pile and you're going to get an on-site interview very quickly. I think the PSM3 is just an amazing assessment that really demonstrates a very high level knowledge of Scrum. But otherwise, I'm not so worried about resumes like HR. I think the people teams, they're really good at deciding, do people have experience or not. So what I'm looking for, I'm looking for real skills. And so when I do an interview, it's usually 3 parts. I'll have them do a teach me Scrum kind of activity with a whiteboard. I want them to draw the different events, draw the different artifacts and roles. And the thing is, if they start drawing up like release trains, or if they start going off the reservation a bit, it's not a disqualification, because then I have the opportunity to see if they're coachable. And so I'll start offering suggestions or asking questions about some of the things they're drawing. And if it seems like they're coachable and we have a great conversation about Scrum and we get our thinking somewhat in alignment, I'm very happy at that point, and then move on to another idea here, which is have them actually facilitate a daily Scrum. And so this person is on site. They've just done the teach back. We're going to work with a team that they could potentially end up serving. And I'll say, all right, please facilitate in a way that you think is appropriate for the role. And so what I'm looking for is what happens when the dev team starts looking at the Scrum Master and only speaking to the Scrum Master. Do they have a way to diffuse that? Do they have a way to break that attention? Are they trying to turn it into a status meeting? And again, if those anti-patterns start cropping up, it's a coachable moment. And I think that's another good sign of can we work with this person? Are they coachable? Are they teachable? And we'll see how that goes. If they're able to facilitate a daily Scrum pretty well, we'll then go to a retro. So have them actually facilitate a retrospective with a real team. And the idea is we're sending someone in cold. They don't know anything about the team. They don't know anything about the product. But at the end of the time box, they need to walk out of that room with a really good improvement item. And so if they start the retro with what went well, what didn't, what do we need to change, I'll pause and say, that's a really cool format. A lot of people use it. Do you have another one? And if they don't, then we're going to co-facilitate with Starfish or Sailboat or something different, just to kind of see how they handle and adapt to that situation. At the end, I think is where, and you know what, I don't mind sharing this. I think we've created competitive advantages at organizations when we give the candidate feedback. And if it's a no, we've turned no into not yet. Here's the feedback about your interview. Here's the things that we saw that we really loved. Here's some things that we'd love to see you work on. And by the way, here's a book. I used to give out Jeff Watts's Scrum Mastery. Now I give out our book. Hopefully that's not too selfish, but I mean, depending on what we see in the person, if they're struggling with retros, we're going to give out Derby and Larson's excellent retro book. But the person's walking out with some positive feedback, some things to work on. We've given them a book. We're going to give them other resources. And what's amazing is whether they get the job or not, they're walking out the door excited about their future as a Scrum Master. They're walking out the door excited about things that they could learn and try to improve on. They actually become some of your biggest advocates and advertisers for your open job. Like, can you imagine a candidate who doesn't get the job excited to tell other people about your company? I mean, that's the kind of hiring tips and practices that I've worked on at a high level. I don't know, Todd, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, other than their foundational knowledge of Scrum, and the obvious questions around empiricism and the values, as Ryan kind of alluded to, certifications, everybody can have one, right? But one question that is vitally important to me that I ask almost right away is, what are you reading? Because not that you should, if you're in any profession, you should be a lifetime learner, right? That's the field that we work in. But especially Scrum Masters, yeah, as a Scrum Master, you need to be a really curious person. You need to be curious about everything from maybe getting a comprehensive understanding of what project management is, or understanding lean or extreme programming, or understanding people, taking training from the back of the room, or reading the Liberating Structures book. But I like to ask what they're reading, and if the answer is I don't read books, I don't explore different things, that's a big flag for me right away, because a Scrum Master has to be curious. So I'll add that on top of what you said, Ryan.
Cool.
Excellent. So moving on. Oops, I lost it here. So this one, this is perfect for you, Ryan, is one of the stewards for the Agile Leadership class as well. How do you have an agile mindset? Well, sorry, how do you have an agile mindset for the organization, especially when they're used to just deadline driven versus value driven? What do you do? How do you help evolve that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We actually put a chapter in the book about this. There's a management chapter in the book that we struggled with for quite a bit because it really well, it's debatable whether or not it should actually be there. And we get a lot of questions like this. So what do we do when the leadership team is deadline driven? What do we do when they don't get it? What do we do when leaders are not on board? And what we've tried to lay out, or what we've laid out, a few ideas here. First of all, it's up to us as a Scrum Master to demonstrate the value that Scrum brings to the leader. And if we have failed to do that, it's on us, it's not on the leader. And so Todd and I take the stance that we are ultimately responsible for the leader's understanding of Scrum. It's part of the role. And so I think first and foremost is understanding that the leaders they are not broken. They are not wrong. They are working in a way that the current system in your organization, they're working in a way that's rewarded. And so I think first and foremost, we need to figure out, how do we make this Scrum implementation about the leader? How do we make this implementation? How do we put it in terms that are beneficial to that leader? How do we approach this leader in a way that that they're going to be receptive to? And there's a few understandings. Being a former executive and a Scrum Master, you're not going to get everything you want in one conversation. Right? So you're building relationships and you're building trust with that leader, and you're showing in very small increments and experiments how you're not upending their world, how you're not going to make them look bad. You're also showing them their future position in the organization. A lot of leaders, when we see the resistance, when we see this lack of desire to change, it's because if you read the Scrum Guide, manager and leader are not in there. And so when we just hand them the Scrum Guide in no context, there is a freak out moment. And I've seen this as a peer to executives, and I've also seen it as a Scrum Master where they're like, hey, I'm not even mentioned in here. Why would I go along with this? And then barriers pop up. And so a lot of it is, let's be a great partner to the management and leadership team. We have to do that as Scrum Masters because our Scrum teams need us to have great relationships with leadership and management. So let's be a great partner. Let's take a long view approach with changing a mindset, because mindsets do not change overnight. But let's also make sure that when we're talking to this leader, we're speaking in terms that are important to them, and we're speaking in ways that are going to show the benefit back to the leader. And I think if we can start down that path, over time, you're going to see a shift. But we also have to go back to the dev team and the product owner and say, look, this leader is ready for a change. So we've built this relationship. We think they're there. We have to deliver. Right? We are trying to shift from a date-driven culture to a culture of delivery. And so if we've built this relationship, we've built this trust, and the leader is starting to come on board, and we don't ship anything for 3 or 4 sprints, we've lost. The greatest builder of trust, in my opinion, is delivery. And so it's two sides, right? It's not just the leaders don't get it. We earn that right for the leader. We earn that trust. We earn that right for the leader to come along with us. What do you think, Todd?
Yeah, you know, and I've been guilty of this in my career in working in a Scrum team in one of the roles, and saying, oh, they're just getting in our way. Management's slowing us down. They're asking all these questions. It doesn't make sense. I'm frustrated. And I've done that as a Scrum Master. I've done that as a developer. I've done that as a product owner. And I think we need to have a little bit more empathy towards management. We need to get out of our Scrum bubble, as we like to call it, and we need to sit down and we need to talk to them, have the discussions, and hear what is on their mind and what is concerning them. I also see this when we're quite frankly not delivering, right? So the beautiful thing about Scrum is in that 4 weeks or less, depending on your sprint length, you have a done, potentially shippable product increment, and it's of high quality. It's something that's able to be put into the market if the product owner so decides to do that. But are you doing that? Is that something that your team has a standard on? Are they capable of doing that? So I think the popping your Scrum bubble and delivery is 100% it. And the last thing I like to talk about with management and executives in this is, you know, we've talked about this quite extensively the past few weeks, Ryan, is in your 6 box, Why are you starting all your new product development efforts green? They are not green. When you start, it's red. It's the time you know the very least about what the future of that product might look like, or even if it's worth doing. So let's shift that paradigm if we can. When we start something, it's red, and we're striving to work to yellow, and then hopefully green when it's being well received and validated that the customers like it. So I think that kind of relates, and in a side way, we need to talk to them about complexity, and that my red green or red yellow green example kind of shows a method that you might use to speak with them about it.
Excellent. So there's obviously a bunch of Scrum Masters on this call, because there are a whole lot of questions that are somewhat similar around engaging with the product owner. I'll read this one, but there were a whole bunch of others. How would you tackle the anti-pattern of a product owner that's not engaging? And then there's others that are asking about how do you get the product owner more engaged? How do you get the product owner who is reluctant to trust the development team to trust them, and so on. So you kind of get the theme there. A whole lot about how do we coach, to me, it's how do we coach the product owner to believe in what they're doing.
Yeah, right. Todd's alley.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the biggest things that I've seen as a theme across a lot of different organizations, is how the role of the product owner has emerged, which in most instances, that product owner, being a product owner, is 10% of their job. And so the other 90% of their job is doing all kinds of other things. But how can you have a product owner that 10% of their job is to discover hypotheticals around what value is to their customers, engage with customers, go out and talk to and unearth stakeholders and facilitate really difficult meetings with sometimes people that don't get along, and then to be there to answer questions and pair with the development team and have a good relationship with them. So I always start with how is the role of the product owner viewed in your organization? Is it viewed as how it really should be, as someone that's empowered, that owns the budget, that's looking at return on investment, that's looking at what customers are doing and having conversations with them? Is all of that true? Are they a true entrepreneur? Do they own the budget? Is oftentimes where you can start with that. And if the answer is yes to all those, that's awesome, because that makes things a little bit easier. My guess is that a lot of you Scrum Masters out there are shaking your head, yeah, that's not true. I only get my product owner for 2 hours a week at best. But most product owners that were put in that circumstance don't know what it means to be a product owner. And that's on you, Scrum Masters, right? It's on you for talking with them about how Scrum works, how they can leverage Scrum as a competitive advantage for how they're building their product, and how to trust their development team to get to deliver done increments, right? And you also need to work with your development team to gain that trust, right, by delivering done increments. So I think that it's vitally important as a Scrum Master that we pair and help our product owners, and to do I'll call it a Ryanism, have a sit down and talk to them, ask them how you can better serve them, right? Instead of just immediately taking the stance of, well, the product owner is just being painful to everything, why not sit down and see what is paining them? Having been a product owner before, I can tell you that it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to deal with stakeholders that don't get along. I've been in a situation where none of the stakeholders got along at all, but the one thing they all agreed on is that they didn't like me, the product owner. So I think that having, again, empathy towards them and understanding how you can better serve them and their conversations with stakeholders and customers and value propositions and things such as that, and methods for ordering and managing the product backlog, that's up to you. That's a Scrum Master's job, service to the product owner. Anything else to add, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that remembering that we serve the product owner is really, really important, right? So it's not asking what the product owner can do for us, it's what can we do for them. I think I stole that from Kennedy, but I'm not sure. But how does this play out? I mean, it's really, take the product owner who doesn't have the full authority or who isn't empowered. So as a Scrum Master, my job is to get this person promoted to the point to where they actually have authority. And so that can look like a lot of different things. I mean, we could, let's say we follow the money, and I take my product owner with me, and we meet with the VP who has the budget, and we meet with them every single day. We're going to visit this VP every single day because they have not empowered this product owner. And by the third or fourth day, the VP might say, look, I love these little meetings. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I don't have time for this. What can we do to make this a weekly or a monthly type of meeting? And that's my opportunity as a Scrum Master to say, look, if we could get this if we could get this product owner 100% dedicated to this product and let them make decisions that are less than $10,000 in impact, we would only have to visit you every week or every month. And what we've done is we've bumped that person up just a little bit. Take the long view. It's iterative and incremental in relationship building, in product delivery. But my job as a Scrum Master is to find those opportunities to get that product owner promoted up through the org chart, promoted up in authority, promoted up to the points where they have that shot of being the entrepreneur. And I think that's a different mindset for a lot of Scrum Masters. And I think if we adopt that thinking, some ideas will start popping up about how we actually get this product owner 100% on a team, get this product owner re-engaged. Because I'll tell you what, a product owner who's being served like that, they will be engaged. They will be your partner. They will work with you. If we're not serving them like that, suddenly they're not available. So again, it comes back to us as Scrum Masters to make those kind of things happen through relationship building and through service.
Yeah, and one last point on that is your Scrum or your product owners are required in a sprint retrospective, right? That's a whole Scrum team event. And I think that's a great opportunity to talk about this. It's not just what can the development team improve, it's what can the Scrum team improve. So oftentimes I'll see that the product owner is too busy. They just can't make the retrospective. Scrum requires that the product owner is there. So.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you both. Can we go to the next slide? I want to be conscious of time. We could go on for days. There's lots of questions here.
We could, yeah.
and lots of answers, but I do want to be conscious of our time box here. So again, the book, Fixing Your Scrum, written by our two authors, Ryan and Todd. Order it today. It's available electronically as well as in paperback. And keep learning, keep growing. As both said, nobody should ever stop. And we've got lots of information, lots of content available, a lot of free content in these learning paths for the different roles, whether you're a Scrum Master or you're a Scrum Master working with your product owner, maybe want to give them a little homework. Send them over, have them check out these learning paths and continue their learning. So with that, next slide, I just want to say again, thank you to our presenters, Todd and Ryan. Thank you to our audience for taking time out of your busy days, and hopefully you're all safe, and we will all get through this. Thank you and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to Ryan and I.
Yeah, thanks. We enjoyed it.
Bye, all.